at this time last year, in fact, on this day last year, I was up in Rochester, Minnesota, at the Mayo Clinic, because my doctor 2 weeks earlier than that had thought I wasn't going to last another month. And I had been able to walk up to 150 steps a day during the summer, but by this time a year ago, I could only take 1 step a day. And I was in a wheelchair the rest of the time. I'd sleep 22 hours a day, and I'd be awake for 2, and barely awake. I wouldn't be vertical at all. So just to be vertical is really a blessing. I'm delighted to be able to stand, although I did ask Harry for a stool this whole weekend. I was hoping at least this morning. I wanted to tell you a little bit about this disease that you all have been praying about, and give you an update on my health, and tell you a couple of lessons that I've learned in the last year from it, and then tell you how we spent the summer. Now, this is all part of the preface, so it actually is part of the outline. And for those of you who heard me this weekend, you know that the preface always takes as long as the whole message. So, in March of '97, I started to have some tingling in my legs from my hips on down. That was like my legs were completely asleep, and I could walk, but just barely. And I'd teach a class at the seminary, and then I'd have to collapse for a couple hours, and I'd teach a class, and then collapse for a couple hours. I finally saw a doctor the next month, and he immediately put me into the hospital and said, you may have some kind of a neurological problem here, because my memory was going. I didn't know who the president was, and we won't comment on that. Well, I've got to resist the temptation. Just leave it at that. So they ran me through a battery of tests. My least favorite was the spinal tap, which they had to do 4 times to get some fluids to check to see what kind of white blood count I had in my brain. And they decided that they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, so they sent me home. And I was degenerating even worse. So 3 days later, when I could not hold a fork in my hands, not because of lack of strength, it was rather because I couldn't tell my hand to hold it. I was sitting there at the dinner table, and I had to use 2 hands, and my hands would get all gnarled up, and I knew that was not real good etiquette to eat like that, but I couldn't fix it. So my wife ran me down to the hospital, and they put me into ICU that night because I was unable to move my body in many other respects. And what happened at that time, I was in ICU for a day and a half. They weren't really sure what was wrong, but they knew something was very seriously wrong with me. And one of the greatest, if not the greatest, event took place at that time. My oldest son, who is now a sophomore in college at Trinity University in San Antonio, I'm very, very close to him, and he was so concerned about me being in ICU that here he was on the swim team at the high school in Carrollton, Texas, just outside of Dallas. He was the captain of the swim team, and the next day while I was in ICU, he decided to be rather rebellious, and somebody on the team said, "Hey, Noah, you want to go smoke a cigarette?" So he said, "Yeah, I think I'd like to do that." And so they immediately got caught, which was God's justice, I think. I think that about the worst thing he's ever done was to smoke a cigarette for about 30 seconds, which is, he's still totally depraved. I don't want to deny depravity because his room is a mess. I mean, but nevertheless, he got caught. He had to apologize to his teachers. He got a 2-day suspension, and then he had to tell us about it. And so I said, "No, were you just real worried about me being in ICU?" Because by this time I had gotten out of ICU and was in another hospital. And he said, "Yeah, I was just real worried about it." I said, "You know, if you were worried about it, it seems like smoking cigarettes is not going to solve the problem. A 6-pack of Bud might have done something, but cigarettes, I mean, what's that going to do for you?" And I said, "I don't think this was worry as much as it was rebellion. And I think you were mad at God because I was in ICU." And we talked about it for a while, and he said, "Yeah, I think that's right." So I said, "It seems to me that your Christianity is more related to your personality than it is to Jesus Christ. You want to be a friend to people, and you don't want to live for the Lord regardless of the consequences. And I said, I'm going to start praying that your beliefs are linked more strongly to Christ, and that you'll stand up for Him regardless of what's going on. I said, I'm going to start praying for you that you'll start sharing your faith. He had never shared his faith with anybody before. 2 weeks later, he shared his love for Jesus Christ with one of his classmates, and then shared it again with someone else. And I was just delighted to see how he was changing, because he knew when I started praying for him that he didn't have much of a chance, Then here it was, 6 months later, and he's in college. Freshman year at Trinity University, which is not a Christian school, even though it has the name Trinity in it. And he is sitting in his atheist philosophy professor's office, asking him what he thinks of Jesus Christ. Now, here's a kid who back in April was so afraid to share his faith that he would go and just rebel against God and smoke cigarettes behind the swimming pool. 6 months later, now he's openly sharing the faith that he has in Jesus Christ with us. That to me, quite frankly, made the entire year and a half that I went through with this viral encephalitis worth it. To see my son change like that, I would not change what the Lord has done. I wouldn't take these years back. I mean, I don't want to trade them for anything. This is His will, and it's how He's brought about my son to glorify Him. I'm very grateful for that. Well, last night, Harry and Sharon and I ate dinner with the Eastons, and Susan asked a question. She said, and she was very polite. She said, "What have you learned from this last year?" She could have said it in such a way that really implicated me. She could have said, "All right, what lessons did the Lord need to hammer into your head, and why did you get sick for so long?" But she didn't say it that way. Although I heard it, wheeling around up here, and I said, That's an easy question to answer. The biggest lesson I've learned is the love of the body of Christ. I've been absolutely overwhelmed by God's people in coming to our aid, and you all have contributed to me learning that lesson in a tremendous way. You have encouraged us from afar. You've supported us financially. We are just absolutely stunned at what this church has done for us, and we're so grateful to all of you for the tremendous encouragement and the lesson that you've taught me about the love of God's people. It's really been great. So thank you for that. I'm delighted to be back with you, and I really do feel part of this body. I only wish my wife could be here with me today. Well, still on the preface, I wanted to update you about what's happened since I got sick. I'm still not back to full strength yet. I'm about 85% recovered, which means I need to sleep a lot. And Harry won't let me do that at his house. But I've made it. Have we been here on time, or just about on time every meeting? Within a minute or two, I think, which makes him very nervous. He's got to be here 45 minutes ahead of time, But I just don't have quite the energy to move like I used to. I should get back to full strength in about a year or two. And the only thing that I still have in terms of a residual effect is energy levels. My memory is pretty good. I had forgotten my wife's name after I forgot the president's name. Now, the president, that's one thing, but you forget your wife's name, you've got some problems. And I wasn't alarmed by that until I started forgetting some of my Greek. That's when I got concerned. And then I started having hallucinations. I had convulsions. I would have temporary paralysis, complete paralysis except for my fingers, for an hour and a half at a time. Profuse sweating. When I was up at Rochester last year, it snowed in October, and I was wearing just a short-sleeved shirt, and I was sweating because the body just does a lot of strange things when you're going through this kind of a deal. They weren't exactly sure what it was, some kind of viral encephalitis. That's all they could determine, but they said, you're fine, get better, get back to work. So that's what I've been trying to do. This last summer has been a magnificent summer for me in helping me to recover, because I've had a project to work on. It's called the New English Translation of the Bible. And by having this project, up until this last summer, I could only work maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. And this last summer, I've been so driven by it that I would put in about 15 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was really a good project for me to work on. I had 10 students who would assist me in this, editing of this translation and doing some research on a number of things that we'll get into this hour. But it was a magnificent summer just to wrestle with the Scriptures and to think about the meaning of these great passages of the Bible that we love so much, and to think through exactly what's the best way to express it in English. The somber duty that we faced really is something that we have to take very seriously. When someone translates the Bible into a language, what they are recognizing is that there will be a number of people who will hold that translation and they will say, this is the Word of God. And when you say, should I translate this word this way or this way, whichever way you go with is what people are going to say, this is the Word of God for me for a long, long time. And so we took that duty so seriously, it paralyzed us at first. We were scared, all of us were. But we did work on it, and now the Net Bible New Testament is at the press. It should be out in just a few days, I think. This is the first completely new major translation of the Bible done in 25 years. The last completely new translation was the NIV that was done for the New Testament in 1973, and for the Old Testament and New, it came out in 1978. So I felt that today would be a great time that might have some minor footnote in history, but at least it's a historical occasion to introduce all of you to the Net Bible, and this is the first time I've had the opportunity to do this. Since you have all been so close to me, with your prayers and your support, I've decided I'd like to reciprocate and share with you a little bit about what we've been working on this last summer. So this will be a little bit of a different message. I know Harry always wants to get into one text, and rightfully so, and we'll be looking at a few passages. Well, before we get into the text of the notes, one last comment on the preface. On the table over there, you'll see some leaves from Harry Leaf. In the middle, we've got two beta versions of the Net Bible. That's the last printing before the final draft that came out in June. In a beta version, if any of you are computer literate, you know that what that has to do with is kind of some software testing. This is the first Bible in history that has been on the internet for people to look at ahead of time, and we've had over 500,000 people look at it and make suggestions. And so it's been beta tested by 500,000 people, which is really interesting. But those two copies we're giving to the church library, and then when the real thing comes out, we hope to send a couple more copies to you all. Also, next to it on either side, we've got some leaves of some old texts, and I think it's very helpful if you all would go and take a look at these. And Harry, maybe you could linger a little bit after church or put a label on them to tell them what they are. You can look at it behind, but if you flip these leaves up, it might rattle the glass or something, so it might be better just for him to explain it. On the left side of the table is a leaf from the 1611 King James Bible. It's not a copy, not done in 1998. That is a leaf from the actual 1611 King James Bible. That was the actual size. It's a very large leaf. It was a folio Bible, which meant it was about so big. And you could take a look at that and see what it looked like back then. On the far right is going to be a leaf from the London Polyglot, which was a text that was done in the 1600s with several different translations, including Syriac and Ethiopic and Latin and some other things. Probably you can skip over that one with impunity. But the one to the right of the King James is my favorite one that Dr. Leaf has. I had never seen anybody who's had this before. It's really a magnificent treasure. It's got two leaves on it. And on the top is the Geneva Bible of 1560, which was a magnificent translation. If you were here yesterday, you heard a little bit about the Geneva Bible. And below that is the Tyndale translation of 1536. William Tyndale was the first Englishman to translate the Bible from Greek and Hebrew. So it's the first time we have an English translation of the Greek and Hebrew original. And Harry has a leaf from that. I've got to negotiate with you at some point. That's very exciting stuff. You'll notice in the Tyndale Bible it's the one that has no verse divisions, because verse divisions had not been invented until almost 20 years later. And so it's very significant to look at those things. And I think you might enjoy taking a look at it this afternoon. Well, that's the end of the preface. Now, I guess, time to close in prayer just about, isn't it? Pretty typical.